The bullet had passed clean through Preston Quade's shoulder 3 months ago, and he had been living on borrowed time and stale hardtack ever since, holed up in a lean-to shack at the edge of Abilene, Texas, too proud to ask for help and too stubborn to die. It was August of 1878, and the heat made everything shimmer like a mirage, including his chances of making it through another week without collapsing from infection or starvation, or the sheer weight of his own foolishness. He had been a ranch hand once, working the cattle drives that pushed north through Kansas, but that life had ended when he had witnessed something he should not have seen. Two men in expensive suits had been meeting with his former boss in the dead of night, exchanging money for stolen cattle, and Preston had made the mistake of confronting them about it. The bullet had been their answer, and he had fled south with nothing but his horse, his rifle, and the clothes on his back. The horse had gone lame 2 weeks into his flight, and he had been forced to shoot it rather than let it suffer. That had been the worst day, worse even than the day he took the bullet, because that horse had been the only living thing that had shown him loyalty in years. Now Preston sat in his ramshackle shelter, gnawing on a piece of hardtack that was so old it could have been used as a weapon, and stared out at the dusty road that led into town. He had been into Abilene exactly once since arriving, just long enough to trade his saddle for a sack of hardtack and some ammunition, and the looks he had received from the townspeople had told him everything he needed to know. He was an outsider, a drifter, and in a place like this, that meant he was either dangerous or desperate. He was both, which made him something to be avoided. The wound in his shoulder had mostly healed, but it had healed badly, leaving him with a stiffness that made it hard to lift his right arm above his chest. He could still shoot, though not as accurately as before, and he could still work, though not as hard. What he could not do was swallow his pride long enough to walk into town and ask for a decent meal or a place to sleep that did not have scorpions for roommates. Pride was all he had left, and he wore it like armor, even as it slowly killed him. He was dozing in the afternoon heat when he heard the wagon approaching. The sound of wheels on the hard-packed earth was distinctive, and Preston opened his eyes just enough to watch as a covered wagon pulled by 2 sturdy mules came into view. It was moving slowly, cautiously, and he could see a woman sitting on the driver's bench, her bonnet shading her face from the relentless sun. She was alone, which was unusual enough to make him sit up straighter, ignoring the protest from his shoulder. The wagon slowed as it drew near his shack, and then, to his surprise, it stopped altogether. The woman set the brake and climbed down with the kind of careful grace that spoke of practice, and Preston found himself staring as she turned to face him. She was young, perhaps 25, with dark hair that escaped her bonnet in soft curls and eyes that were a striking shade of green. She wore a simple calico dress that had seen better days, but she carried herself with a quiet dignity that made him suddenly aware of how filthy and ragged he must look. "Afternoon," she called out, her voice clear and steady. "I hope I am not intruding." Preston stood slowly, his hand automatically moving to rest near his revolver, though not in any threatening way. It was simply instinct, the habit of a man who had learned to be wary. "Afternoon," he replied, his voice rough from disuse. "You lost." She smiled, and it was a genuine smile, not the nervous kind that people gave when they were afraid. "No, not lost. I heard there was someone living out here, and I thought you might appreciate some fresh bread. I baked this morning." She reached into the back of her wagon and pulled out a cloth-covered basket, and the smell that wafted from it made Preston's stomach clench with sudden, desperate hunger. It had been so long since he had eaten anything that was not stale or dried or tasteless that the scent of fresh baked bread was almost painful. "I do not have money to pay you," he said, the words coming out harsher than he intended. Pride again, making him defensive when he should have been grateful. "I am not asking for money," she said simply, and she walked toward him with the basket held out like an offering. "My name is Willa Whitmore. I run a bakery in town, or I am trying to anyway. Business has been slow, and I have more bread than I can sell most days. It seems a shame to let it go to waste when there are people who could use it." Preston stared at her, trying to find the catch, the angle, the reason why a respectable woman would come out to the edge of nowhere to give bread to a man like him. He could not find one, which made him more suspicious, not less. "Preston Quade," he said finally, because manners had been beaten into him as a boy and some habits died hard. "It is nice to meet you, Preston," Willa said, and she held out the basket until he had no choice but to take it or risk being rude. His fingers closed around the handle, and the weight of it was surprisingly heavy. When he pulled back the cloth, he found not just bread but also a jar of honey and a small block of cheese. "This is too much," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. He was already imagining the taste of soft bread with honey, the richness of cheese, and his mouth was watering. "It is what I had," Willa replied. "I will be back this way in a few days if you would like more. No obligation, no payment required. I just think everyone deserves to eat something decent now and then." Before he could respond, she had turned and walked back to her wagon, climbing up onto the bench with the same practiced ease. She released the brake and snapped the reins, and the mules started forward, pulling the wagon back onto the road. Preston stood there holding the basket, watching her go, and for the first time in months he felt something other than anger or pain or bitter resignation. He felt confused, which was almost a relief. He carried the basket inside his shack and sat down on the wooden crate that served as his only furniture. The bread was still warm, and when he tore off a piece and bit into it, the taste was so good it was almost overwhelming. He closed his eyes and chewed slowly, savoring every bite, and he felt something tight in his chest begin to loosen. He ate half the loaf before he forced himself to stop, knowing he would make himself sick if he ate too much after months of near starvation. He wrapped the rest carefully and set it aside, then opened the jar of honey and let himself taste just a little, straight from the jar. That night, he lay on his bedroll and thought about Willa Whitmore. He tried to tell himself that her kindness meant nothing, that she was probably just a busybody or someone who got satisfaction from charity work. But he could not quite make himself believe it. There had been something in her eyes, something that was not pity and not judgment, just a simple recognition of one human being seeing another. It had been a long time since anyone had looked at him that way. 3 days later, just as she had promised, Willa returned. This time she brought bread and a pot of stew that was still warm from the fire. Preston saw her coming and walked out to meet her, feeling self-conscious about the fact that he had not washed or shaved in days. She did not seem to notice or care. "I thought you might like something hot," she said, handing him the pot. "The bread is apple cinnamon today. I was experimenting." "You did not have to do this," Preston said, but he took the pot and the bread because he was not stupid enough to turn down real food twice. "I know I did not have to," Willa replied. "I wanted to. How is your shoulder?" Preston froze, his eyes narrowing. "What makes you think there is anything wrong with my shoulder? You favor it when you move," she said calmly. "And I saw the blood on your shirt when you reached for the basket last time. Old blood, but blood nonetheless. If you need someone to look at it, Dr. Morrison in town is a good man. He would not ask too many questions." "I am fine," Preston said, the words clipped and defensive. Willa studied him for a moment and then she nodded. "All right. If you change your mind, the offer stands." She paused, then added, "I am not here to judge you, Preston. Whatever brought you to this place, whatever you are running from, it is your business. I just thought you could use a friend." A friend. The word was so foreign to him that he almost did not recognize it. He had not had a friend in years, not since he had left his family's farm in Missouri to seek his fortune out west. He had found plenty of acquaintances, drinking buddies, fellow workers, but not friends. Friends required trust, and trust was a luxury he could not afford. "Why?" he asked, the question coming out before he could stop it. "Why are you doing this?" Willa looked away, her gaze drifting toward the horizon. "I came to Abilene 6 months ago with nothing but a wagon, some supplies, and a dream of starting my own business. I thought it would be easy, that people would welcome a bakery, but I was wrong. The women in town see me as competition or as too independent for my own good. The men see me as either a potential wife or as someone to be ignored. I have been lonely, and I have been judged, and I have been dismissed. So when I heard about a man living out here alone, I thought maybe you could use someone who understood what it was like to be an outsider." Her honesty caught him off guard, and for a moment he did not know what to say. Then, slowly, he nodded. "Thank you," he said, and he meant it. Willa smiled, and this time there was a hint of relief in it, as though she had been worried he would reject her. "You are welcome. I will see you again soon." She left, and Preston carried the pot and bread into his shack. The stew was thick with vegetables and chunks of beef, and it was the best thing he had tasted in years. He ate it slowly, making it last, and when he was done, he sat back and realized that for the first time in a very long time, he felt something close to contentment. Over the next few weeks, Willa became a regular presence in his life. She came every 3 or 4 days, always bringing food, sometimes bringing other small things like soap or a worn but clean shirt that she said had belonged to her late father. Preston learned that she had come to Texas from Kansas, fleeing a bad situation that she did not talk about in detail, but that he understood involved a man who had not taken no for an answer. She had saved every penny she could, bought the wagon and mules, and set out to make a new life for herself. The bakery was her dream, her way of proving that she could stand on her own 2 feet without needing anyone to take care of her. Preston found himself looking forward to her visits in a way that unsettled him. He told himself it was just because of the food, but he knew that was a lie. It was her company, her voice, the way she talked about her plans and her struggles without any self-pity or expectation of sympathy. She treated him like an equal, not like a charity case, and that made all the difference. He also found himself wanting to be better for her. He started washing regularly in the creek that ran a mile from his shack, shaving with the old straight razor he had kept, and mending his clothes as best he could. He cleaned up the shack, making it less of a hovel and more of a livable space. He even started doing odd jobs around town, swallowing his pride long enough to ask for work at the livery stable and the general store. The pay was not much, but it was enough to keep him fed and to buy a few things he needed. One day in late September, Willa arrived with her usual basket of bread, but this time she also had a worried look on her face. Preston noticed it immediately. "What is wrong?" he asked, taking the basket from her. "There is a man in town," she said, her voice low and tense. "He has been asking about me, about where I live, about my bakery. The sheriff told me he claims to be my cousin, but I do not have any cousins. I think he might be someone sent by the man I ran from in Kansas." Preston felt a surge of anger so strong it surprised him. "Has he threatened you?" "Not directly," Willa said. "But the way he looks at me, the way he watches me when I am working, it makes me afraid. I do not know what to do." "You could leave," Preston said, though the thought of her leaving made his chest tighten. "Go somewhere else, start over again." "I am tired of running," Willa said, and there was steel in her voice. "I built something here, even if it is small. I have a place, a business, a life. I am not going to let him take that from me." Preston looked at her, at the determination in her eyes, and he made a decision. "Then I will help you. If he comes near you, if he tries anything, he will have to go through me first." Willa's eyes widened. "Preston, you do not have to do that. I do not want you to get hurt because of me." "I owe you," Preston said simply. "You helped me when I had nothing, when I was barely surviving. Let me return the favor." For a moment, Willa looked like she might argue, but then she nodded. "Thank you," she said softly. "It means more than you know." Preston started spending more time in town after that, keeping an eye on Willa's bakery from a distance. He was careful not to be obvious about it, but he made sure he was nearby when she opened in the morning and when she closed in the evening. He saw the man she had mentioned, a tall, lean figure with cold eyes and a way of moving that reminded Preston of a predator. The man never approached Willa directly, but he was always there, watching, waiting. One evening, as Willa was closing up her bakery, the man finally made his move. Preston had been waiting across the street, leaning against a post and pretending to smoke a cigarette, when he saw the man walk up to Willa as she locked her door. He could not hear what was being said, but he saw the way Willa stiffened, the way she took a step back, and that was all he needed to see. He crossed the street in a few long strides, his hand resting on the butt of his revolver. "Evening," he said, his voice cold and hard. "Is there a problem here?" The man turned to look at him, and Preston saw recognition flash in his eyes. This was someone who knew violence, who had used it before and would use it again. "No problem," the man said, his voice smooth. "Just having a conversation with the lady." "The lady looks uncomfortable," Preston said. "Maybe you should move along." The man's eyes narrowed. "And who are you to tell me what to do?" "Someone who does not like bullies," Preston replied. He shifted his stance slightly, making sure the man could see the revolver at his hip. "Now, I am going to ask you one more time. Move along." For a moment, the tension hung in the air like a drawn blade, and Preston was sure it was going to come to gunplay. But then the man smiled, a cold, humorless expression, and took a step back. "This is not over," he said, looking at Willa. "We will talk again." He turned and walked away, disappearing into the gathering darkness. Preston waited until he was out of sight, then turned to Willa. "Are you all right?" She nodded, though he could see she was shaken. "Yes, thanks to you." "He said he had a message from someone in Kansas, someone who wanted me to come back. He said if I did not go willingly, he would make sure I regretted it." "You are not going anywhere," Preston said firmly. "I meant what I said. He will have to go through me." Willa looked at him, and there was something in her eyes that made his heart skip a beat. "Why are you doing this, Preston? You barely know me." "I know enough," he said. "You are a good person, Willa. You deserve to be safe, to have the life you are building. If I can help make that happen, then I will." She reached out and touched his arm, her hand warm through the fabric of his shirt. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I do not know what I would do without you." Preston felt something shift inside him, something that had been locked away for a long time. He realized with a clarity that was almost painful that he cared about this woman, not just as someone he owed a debt to, but as someone he wanted to protect, to be near, to know better. It was a dangerous feeling, one that made him vulnerable, but he could not deny it. Over the next few days, Preston stayed close to Willa, and the man from Kansas kept his distance. But Preston knew it was only a matter of time before he tried something. Men like that did not give up easily, and they did not take kindly to being challenged. The confrontation came on a Sunday morning, when the town was quiet and most people were at church. Preston had stayed with Willa at her bakery, helping her prepare for the next day's baking, when the man appeared in the doorway. He had two others with him this time, both rough-looking characters who were clearly hired muscle. "Time to go, Willa," the man said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "You have had your little adventure. Now it is time to face the consequences." "She is not going anywhere," Preston said, stepping between them. He could feel his heart pounding, but his hand was steady as it moved to his revolver. The man laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "You think you can stop all three of us, Drifter? You are either brave or stupid." "Maybe both," Preston said, "but I am not moving." The two hired men moved to flank him, and Preston knew he was in trouble. He could maybe take one of them in a straight fight, but three was too many, especially with his bad shoulder. He was about to draw his weapon, knowing it would likely be the last thing he ever did, when a voice rang out from behind them. "That is enough." Preston turned his head and saw Sheriff Tom Brennan standing in the doorway, his shotgun leveled at the three men. "I have been watching you boys for days now," the sheriff said, "and I am pretty sure you are not here for any good reason. So here is what is going to happen. You are going to leave this bakery, leave Miss Whitmore alone, and get out of my town. If I see you again, I will arrest you for disturbing the peace, and if you try anything with her or with Quad here, I will shoot you myself. We clear?" The man from Kansas glared at the sheriff, then at Preston, and finally at Willa. "This is not over," he said, but there was defeat in his voice. He turned and left, his two companions following, and Preston let out a breath he had not realized he was holding. Sheriff Brennan lowered his shotgun and looked at Preston. "You are either very brave or very foolish, Quad. I have not decided which yet." "Probably a bit of both," Preston said, echoing his earlier words. The sheriff nodded. "Well, you did good standing up for Miss Whitmore. That took guts. If you are looking for steady work, I could use a deputy. The pay is not great, but it is honest, and it comes with a room at the jail." Preston blinked, surprised. "You want me as a deputy?" "I want someone who is willing to stand up for what is right, even when it is dangerous," the sheriff said. "You proved you are that kind of man today. Think about it." He left, and Preston turned to find Willa staring at him with tears in her eyes. "You could have been killed," she said, her voice shaking. "You should not have risked yourself for me." "I would risk a lot more than that," Preston said, and he realized it was the truth. "Willa, I do not know how to say this, but you have become important to me. More important than I ever thought anyone could be. I care about you, and I want to make sure you are safe and happy. If that means standing between you and danger, then that is what I will do." Willa stepped closer to him, her eyes searching his face. "I care about you too, Preston," she said softly. "I have from the first time I saw you. You were so alone, so proud, and I just wanted to help. But then I got to know you, and I saw the man you really are, and I started to feel things I did not expect to feel." Preston reached out and touched her cheek, his hand rough but gentle. "I am not much," he said. "I am a drifter with a bad shoulder and a past I am not proud of. But if you will have me, I will spend the rest of my life trying to be the man you deserve." "You already are," Willa said, and then she kissed him. It was a soft, tentative kiss at first, but it quickly deepened, and Preston felt like something inside him that had been broken was finally starting to heal. He wrapped his arms around her, careful of his shoulder, and held her close, and for the first time in years, he felt like he had found a place where he belonged. When they finally pulled apart, Willa was smiling through her tears. "So what now?" she asked. "Now I take the sheriff up on his offer," Preston said. "I become a deputy, earn an honest living, and court you properly if you will let me." "I would like that very much," Willa said. Preston did take the job as deputy, and it turned out he was good at it. His years on the trail had taught him how to read people, how to spot trouble before it started, and how to handle himself in dangerous situations. The town started to respect him, And more importantly, they started to respect Willa. People began to see her not just as the woman who ran the bakery, but as the woman who had won the heart of Deputy Quade, and that gave her a legitimacy she had not had before. They courted for 6 months, and it was a proper courtship, with Sunday dinners at the boarding house where Willa lived and walks through town in the evening. Preston learned everything about her, from her childhood in Kansas to her love of baking to her dream of one day having a family of her own. Willa learned about his past, about the ranch where he had worked and the men who had tried to kill him, and she never judged him for any of it. She just listened, and she understood, and that was more than he had ever hoped for. In the spring of 1879, Preston asked Willa to marry him. He did it on a Sunday afternoon, in the small garden behind her bakery, with a ring he had saved up for months to buy. It was not much, just a simple gold band with a tiny stone, but Willa cried when she saw it and said yes before he could even finish asking the question. They were married in June, in the same church where most of the town attended services. It was a small ceremony, with Sheriff Brennan serving as Preston's best man and the owner of the boarding house standing up for Willa. The townspeople came, more out of curiosity than anything else, but by the end of the ceremony there was genuine warmth in their congratulations. Preston and Willa had proven themselves, and the town had accepted them. They moved into a small house on the edge of town, not far from where Preston's old shack had stood. It was a real house, with wooden floors and a proper roof, and a kitchen where Willa could bake to her heart's content. Preston continued to work as a deputy, and Willa kept running her bakery, and together they built a life that was simple but happy. A year after they were married, Willa told Preston she was pregnant. He had been working late at the jail, dealing with a dispute between 2 ranchers, when she met him at the door with a smile that could have lit up the whole state. "We are going to have a baby," she said, and Preston felt his knees go weak. "A baby," he repeated as though he could not quite believe it. "A baby," Willa confirmed, laughing at the expression on his face. "You are going to be a father, Preston Quade." He swept her into his arms, spinning her around despite her protests that he would hurt his shoulder, and he kissed her until they were both breathless. "I am going to be a father," he said, and the words felt like a miracle. Their son was born in the spring of 1880, a healthy, squalling baby with his mother's green eyes and his father's stubborn chin. They named him Samuel, after Preston's father, and from the moment Preston held him for the first time, he knew that this was what he had been searching for all along. Not wealth, not adventure, not glory, but this simple, profound connection to another human being. 2 other human beings, actually, because Willa was the center of his world and Samuel was the future they had built together. Life was not always easy. There were hard times, lean years when the crops failed and money was tight. There were moments of fear, like the time a gang of outlaws rode through Abilene and Preston had to face them down with only the sheriff and 1 other deputy. But through it all, Preston had Willa and she had him, and that made everything bearable. They had 2 more children over the years. A daughter named Clara who had Willa's dark hair and a gift for baking that rivaled her mother's, and another son named James who was quiet and thoughtful and who loved to read. Preston watched them grow, watched them become their own people, and he marveled at how different his life had turned out from what he had expected. He never forgot those months he had spent alone in the shack, surviving on hardtack and pride, waiting for something to change. And he never forgot the day Willa had arrived with fresh bread and no judgment, offering him not just food but hope. She had saved him in every way a person could be saved, and he spent the rest of his life trying to be worthy of that gift. By the time Preston was in his 50s, He had retired from being a deputy and had taken over the management of Willa's bakery, which had grown into a thriving business with 2 additional locations in nearby towns. Samuel had become a rancher. Clara had married a schoolteacher and opened her own bakery in Kansas, and James had gone east to study law. The house that had once seemed so small now felt too large with just Preston and Willa, but they filled it with grandchildren on the weekends and with memories every day. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set over the Texas plains, Willa leaned her head against Preston's shoulder and sighed contentedly. "Do you ever think about how different things could have been?" she asked. "All the time," Preston said, wrapping his arm around her. "If you had not come out to that shack with bread, I probably would have died out there. Or I would have left Texas and ended up somewhere worse. I think about that, and I am grateful every single day that you took a chance on me." "I did not take a chance," Willa said. "I saw someone who needed help and I helped. It was that simple." "It was never simple," Preston said. "You gave me more than food, Willa. You gave me a reason to live, a reason to try again. You saw something in me that I did not see in myself, and you made me believe I could be better." "That is not simple. That is extraordinary." Willa turned to look at him, her eyes still as green and bright as they had been the day they met. "You gave me the same thing," she said. "I was so alone when I came here, so afraid that I would fail and have to go back to Kansas with my tail between my legs. But you stood by me, you protected me, and you made me feel like I was not alone anymore. We saved each other, Preston." He kissed her then, a slow, sweet kiss that held decades of love and gratitude and partnership. When they pulled apart, he rested his forehead against hers and smiled. "I would do it all again," he said. "Every hard moment, every struggle, every fear. I would do it all again if it meant ending up here with you." "So would I," Willa whispered. They sat together as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold. The town of Abilene spread out before them, peaceful and prosperous, and Preston thought about all the years that had passed, all the changes they had seen, and all the love they had built. It had started with hardtack and pride, with loneliness and desperation, but it had grown into something beautiful and enduring. Preston Quade had been a man surviving on borrowed time, a drifter with no future and no hope. But Willa Whitmore had arrived with fresh bread and no judgment, and she had given him a gift more valuable than gold. She had given him a second chance, a new life, and a love that would last until the end of his days. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Preston held his wife close and whispered a silent prayer of thanks. He had been lost, but he had been found. He had been broken, but he had been healed. And all because a woman with green eyes and a kind heart had refused to let him face the world alone. Years continued to pass in Abilene, and Preston and Willa remained fixtures of the community, respected and loved by nearly everyone who knew them. The bakery that Willa had started with nothing but determination and skill had become an institution, and people came from miles around to buy her bread, her pies, and her cinnamon rolls that had become legendary throughout the region. Preston, though retired from official law enforcement, still carried the respect that came with having been a deputy for over 15 years. Young men would often seek his advice, and he would sit with them on the porch of the bakery, dispensing wisdom that came not from books but from hard-won experience. He told them about the importance of standing up for what was right, even when it was difficult. He told them about the value of a good woman and the strength that came from partnership. And he told them, though not in so many words, about the power of second chances. Samuel, their eldest, had married a woman from a neighboring ranch and had given Preston and Willa 4 grandchildren who visited often. The ranch Samuel ran was prosperous, and he had inherited his father's work ethic and his mother's warmth. Clara, their daughter, had indeed opened her own bakery in Kansas, and had written to say she was teaching her own daughter the family recipes. James, the youngest, had finished his law studies and had returned to Texas to practice in San Antonio, though he came home to Abilene as often as his work allowed. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Preston surprised Willa by taking her back to the spot where his old shack had stood. The structure had long since collapsed and been cleared away, but the location remained, marked by a few scattered stones and the memory of what had happened there. "Why are we here?" Willa asked, looking around at the empty space. "Because this is where my life really began," Preston said. "This is where I was at my lowest, where I had given up on everything except surviving one more day, and this is where you found me." He took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. "I wanted to come back here with you so I could thank you properly. Not just for the bread, though that was important, but for seeing me, for not judging me, for giving me a reason to hope again." Willa's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "You have thanked me every day for 20 years, Preston. In the way you love me, in the way you love our children, in the way you live your life with honor and integrity. I do not need words." "I know," Preston said, "but I wanted to give them anyway." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small package wrapped in brown paper. "I made this for you." Willa unwrapped it carefully and found a wooden box, beautifully carved with intricate designs of wheat stalks and flowers. Inside the box was a folded piece of paper. She took it out and unfolded it, and her breath caught when she saw what it was. It was a drawing, done in pencil, of the two of them standing together in front of her bakery. Preston had never been much of an artist, but he had worked on this for months, and it showed. Every line was careful, every detail considered. At the bottom he had written, "She arrived with fresh bread and no judgment, and she saved my life." "Preston," Willa whispered, tears streaming down her face, "this is beautiful." "You are beautiful," he said, "and I am the luckiest man alive." They stood there together, on that empty patch of land where so much had begun, and they held each other as the wind whispered through the grass. It was a moment of perfect peace, of gratitude, of love that had been tested and proven true. As they walked back to town, hand in hand, Preston thought about all the things that had led him to this moment. The betrayal that had sent him fleeing south, the bullet that had nearly killed him, the months of isolation and despair. At the time, it had all seemed like punishment, like the universe was determined to break him. But now he understood that it had been leading him here, to Willa, to this life, to this love. Sometimes the hardest roads led to the most beautiful destinations. Sometimes you had to lose everything to find what really mattered. And sometimes, when you were at your lowest, when you had nothing left but hardtack and pride, the universe sent you exactly what you needed in the form of a woman with fresh bread and an open heart. The years turned into decades, and Preston and Willa grew old together, their hair turning gray and then white, their steps slowing but their love never diminishing. They celebrated 50 years of marriage surrounded by children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. And the party lasted 2 days because so many people wanted to honor them. When Preston was 73 years old, he fell ill with pneumonia. The doctor did what he could, but they all knew that at his age, recovery was uncertain. Willa stayed by his side day and night, refusing to leave even when their children begged her to rest. She held his hand and talked to him, reminding him of all the good times they had shared, all the obstacles they had overcome together. "You have to fight," she told him one night, her voice fierce despite the tears on her cheeks. "You fought for me all those years ago, and you have to fight now." "I am not ready to let you go." Preston, weak but still lucid, squeezed her hand. "I have been fighting my whole life," he said, his voice raspy. "But I am tired, Willa, so tired." "Then rest," she said, adjusting his pillows. "But do not give up, please do not give up." He looked at her, at the woman who had been his everything for more than 5 decades, and he found the strength to smile. "I will try," he promised, and he did try. He fought the illness with the same stubbornness that had kept him alive in that shack all those years ago, the same determination that had made him stand up to the men who threatened Willa. It took weeks, but slowly, gradually, he began to recover. The doctor called it a miracle, but Preston knew better. It was love that had saved him, just as it had saved him that first time. When he was strong enough to sit up and take short walks around the house, Willa made him his favorite meal: fresh bread with honey and a thick stew filled with vegetables from their garden. As he ate, savoring every bite, he looked at her and thought about how much she had given him over the years. "Do you remember the first time you brought me bread?" he asked. "Of course I do," Willa said. "You looked so suspicious, like you thought I was trying to poison you or trick you somehow." "I was not used to kindness," Preston admitted. "I had forgotten what it felt like to have someone care." "Well, I cared then and I care now," Willa said. "And I will keep caring until the day I die." "And I will keep loving you until the day I die," Preston replied. "And probably long after that." They both laughed, the sound filling the room with warmth and joy. It was the laugh of two people who had been through everything together and had come out stronger on the other side. Preston lived another 7 years after that illness. Years that were filled with more grandchildren, more sunsets on the porch, more quiet moments of contentment. When he finally passed away at the age of 80, it was peacefully in his sleep with Willa lying beside him. She woke in the morning to find him gone, and though her heart broke, she also felt a deep sense of gratitude. They had been given so much time together, so many years of happiness, and she would not trade a single moment of it. At his funeral, the entire town turned out to pay their respects. Sheriff Brennan, now retired himself, gave a eulogy that spoke of Preston's courage, his integrity, and his unwavering devotion to his family. Samuel spoke about growing up with a father who had taught him the value of hard work and honesty. Clara talked about the way her father had always made her feel safe and loved. And James, the lawyer, read a statement he had prepared that detailed all the ways Preston Quade had made Abilene a better place. But it was Willa who had the last word. She stood at the grave, supported by her children, and she spoke from the heart. "Preston Quade was the best man I ever knew," she said, her voice steady despite her grief. "He was not perfect. He had his flaws, his struggles, his moments of doubt, but he never stopped trying to be better. He never stopped fighting for the people he loved, and he never stopped being grateful for the life we built together." She paused, looking down at the casket. "He used to tell me that I saved his life, but the truth is, we saved each other. We found each other when we were both lost, and we built something beautiful together. I will miss him every day for the rest of my life, but I will also be grateful every day that I got to love him and be loved by him." She placed a loaf of fresh baked bread on top of the casket, a final tribute to the way their love had begun, and then she stepped back and let them lower him into the ground. Willa lived for another 5 years after Preston's death, and in that time, she continued to run the bakery with the help of her children and grandchildren. She took comfort in the routines they had established together, in the recipes they had perfected over the years, in the memories that filled every corner of their home. When she finally passed away, peacefully in her sleep like her husband before her, The town mourned the loss of a woman who had been a pillar of the community for more than half a century. They buried her next to Preston, in a plot that overlooked the plains they had both loved, and on her headstone they inscribed the words, "She brought fresh bread and no judgment, and she changed the world." Their children continued the bakery, passing it down through the generations, and even 100 years later, people in Abilene still told the story of Preston Quade and Willa Whitmore. They told about the drifter who had been surviving on hardtack and pride, and the baker who had arrived with fresh bread and an open heart. They told about the love that had grown from that simple act of kindness, and about the family that had been built on a foundation of respect, partnership, and unwavering devotion. It became a local legend, a reminder that sometimes the most extraordinary love stories began with the simplest gestures. That sometimes all it took was one person refusing to give up on another, one moment of compassion in a harsh world, one loaf of bread offered without judgment or expectation. Preston and Willa's story lived on, passed down from parents to children, from grandparents to grandchildren, a testament to the power of love to transform lives. It was a story that reminded people that no one was beyond redemption, that no situation was truly hopeless, and that kindness, when offered freely and without strings, could change everything. In the end, that was the legacy of Preston Quade and Willa Whitmore. Not wealth, not fame, not even the successful bakery that bore their name. Their legacy was the love they had shared, the family they had created, and the example they had set for all who came after them. They had proven that even in the hardest times, even in the wild and unforgiving landscape of the Texas frontier, love could flourish and endure. They had shown that a man surviving on hardtack and pride could find hope again, and that a woman with fresh bread and no judgment could be the answer to prayers he did not even know he was saying. They had built a life together from nothing, and in doing so, they had created something that would last far longer than either of them ever could. Their story was one of survival and redemption, of loneliness transformed into belonging, of two broken people who found wholeness in each other. It was a love story for the ages, set against the backdrop of the American West, and it would be remembered and retold for generations to come. Because in the end, love was the only thing that really mattered. Love was what saved Preston when he was at his lowest. Love was what gave Willa the courage to keep going when she was afraid and alone. Love was what sustained them through hard times and good times, through sickness and health, through youth and old age. And love, ultimately, was what made their story worth telling. Not just because it was romantic or dramatic or inspiring, but because it was true. It was a story about real people who had faced real struggles and had found real happiness together. It was a story that proved that no matter how far you had fallen, no matter how lost you were, there was always hope for something better. All it took was one person willing to see you, to help you, to believe in you. One person with fresh bread and no judgment, offering you a second chance at life. And if you were lucky enough to find that person, if you were brave enough to accept what they offered and wise enough to cherish it, then you could build something beautiful that would last forever. Preston and Willa had found that. They had built that. And their love, which had begun on a dusty road outside Abilene, Texas in the summer of 1878, had endured until death and beyond, a shining example of what was possible when two people truly committed to each other. Their great-great-grandchildren still lived in Abilene, still ran the bakery that Willa had started so long ago, and still told the story of how it all began. They told it to their own children, passing down the legacy of love and kindness that had been the foundation of their family for generations. And every time they told it, they made sure to emphasize the most important part. That sometimes, when you least expected it, life gave you exactly what you needed. Sometimes, when you were surviving on nothing but hardtack and pride, someone arrived with fresh bread and no judgment, and everything changed. That was the story of Preston Quade and Willa Whitmore. That was their legacy. And that was their gift to the world. The knowledge that love, when it was real and true and deep, could overcome anything. Even the harsh realities of the Wild West, even the scars of the past, even the fear of an uncertain future. All it took was one moment of kindness, one gesture of compassion, one person refusing to let another person suffer alone. That was how miracles happened. That was how lives were changed. That was how love stories began. And in the case of Preston and Willa, that was how a love story endured for all time. A beacon of hope and inspiration for anyone who had ever felt lost, alone, or forgotten. Their story proved that there was always a way forward, always a reason to keep going, always the possibility of finding something beautiful even in the darkest of times. It was a story worth remembering, worth retelling, worth cherishing, because it was not just their story. It was the story of every person who had ever struggled and survived, every person who had ever been helped by a stranger's kindness, every person who had ever found love when they least expected it. It was a story that proved that the human spirit was resilient, that hope was never truly lost, and that love, in the end, was the most powerful force in the universe. Preston and Willa had known that, had lived that, and had passed that knowledge on to everyone whose lives they had touched. And so their story lived on generation after generation, a testament to the enduring power of love and the transformative nature of compassion. It was a story that would never grow old, never lose its meaning, never cease to inspire those who heard it, because it was true, because it had happened. Because Preston Quade had survived on hardtack and pride for months, and Willa Whitmore had arrived with fresh bread and no judgment, and together they had created something that would last forever. That was their story. That was their legacy. That was the gift they left to the world. And it was a gift that would continue to give long after they were gone, reminding everyone who heard it that love was always possible, always worth fighting for, and always, always worth the risk.